2020, despite a pandemic that brought the world to its knees, and against the direct recommendations of the CDC, Denver carried out 34 sweeps. In the first 6 months of 2021, the city has not only ignored advocates' demand to stop the sweeps, but has increased the rate of displacements by more than 300%, even during a historically bitter winter.
This is the kind of cold that even your dogs don't want to go out in, and it does not take long with exposed skin for frostbite. Right now it's 1 in Denver. It feels like 16 below.
Homeless sweeps continue in the city despite frigid temperatures.
It was 19 degrees outside when the sweep began on February 10th. These blocks are not only the cyclical home to more than 100 unhoused residents, but also where the city's unhoused service providers are concentrated. We spoke to Paul, one of the elders at the 22nd and Stout Street camp, about his experience in this particular unhoused community of Denver.
I was back and forth, and then I went home. My brother died, my mom died, then my baby sister died year before last, so I just took off from driving and came out here and but since I stayed, I got close to the homeless community. And then once they get grounded, meet people, and they know where to go. Around here, if they stay around, that's why we close to downtown. All the resources are here. Me, I had chronic high blood pressure, so I stay close to the clinic. Because you don't look at the weather, you don't know what it's gonna be. So at least I'm here, I'm ready, you know what I'm saying? My health is more important, and so I stay close around.
In the past 18 months, this area has been swept over a dozen times. Yet most of these residents return, often within a week, a day, or even a matter of hours. There is no other choice for many. They count on the services in this 4-square block area to stay alive.
They don't understand that everybody didn't plan to be homeless. You know what I'm saying? Some of them lost jobs. You got teachers out here. You got a lot of people that got different experiences in life and come from different situations in life that are out here. A lot of them, as a matter of fact, you got more people that lost jobs out here than you got people that's just basically homeless. Lost everything. Lost everything as far as don't want to do nothing. You know, it ain't like that. A lot of these people have homes they lost.
The following day, this is what the city left behind after cleaning up the camp on this street. Every sweep begins between 5:30 and 7 a.m., but residents are woken up hours earlier by chain link fencing being dragged into place. Multiple police officers and city contractors then go down the line, shaking tent poles, waking people up, and telling them their deadline for moving that day. This arbitrary deadline typically ranges from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. As that time approaches, the police and city workers become more aggressive, more possessions are wrongfully trashed, and the traumatic stress on the evicted residents is made even worse.
For real, but they worried about you sleeping where you sleeping. All because you lost your job. Or you went through a divorce and it just demolished you. They don't understand some of that. They look at them like they're trash, but actually they lost everything.
It was 20 degrees when this sweep began, yet firemen and city workers confiscated all propane tanks and fuel from the residents being evicted. This happens at every sweep, as the city deems them a fire risk. These tanks are also the only source of heat for most people experiencing homelessness. By the end of the day, the temperature had plummeted to 9 degrees and would not climb back above freezing for the next 5 days.
We go sub-zero with just a high of 7 degrees on Valentine's Day. You just gotta take care of your pets here too in town. With these overnight lows dropping sub-zero, you just wanna bring them inside, right?
After surviving the coldest weekend in 7 years, unhoused residents of Denver faced another sweep on Wednesday morning, February 17th. By 6:30, there were 10 police officers on the scene, for a camp of just over a dozen people. Proceeding like always, the city began tearing apart tents, marking unoccupied homes for destruction if they find open food containers, any sign of human waste, or even a single syringe. About an hour into the eviction, EHS contractors set to work on this tent, yanking out blankets and cutting off tarps, not knowing that an unhoused man named Marcio was still sleeping inside. They hadn't even checked before throwing out his belongings or pulling apart his home. If the Bobcat hadn't been busy crushing other tents, this morning could have been much more tragic. Marcio moved just 2 blocks away and rebuilt his camp from what belongings he could salvage. Snow began to fall later that evening and would continue through the night. Of all the residents at 13th and Pearl, only 2 were given motel vouchers. The rest were chased off and left to fend for themselves. At 5:30 a.m., 2 inches of snow weighed down every tent at 18th and Emerson, but the camp was already fenced in, and 4 police cruisers were idling inside, their occupants warm and toasty. As people were pressured by Denver police and EHS contractors to pack up and move along, many people found that their belongings were frozen to the ground. Some tents ripped, rendering them useless. Poles and zippers snapped, and people abandoned items in frustration, or were simply unable to carry the extra weight of their soaked belongings. As usual, any visible propane tanks were seized by the city. Of the 15 residents displaced, only 1 was offered a temporary motel room. The others scattered to the surrounding blocks, even though every public space in the city was covered in snow. The only places free of snow were the bare spots of ground they had just been kicked off. The camp at 27th and Marion was home to about a dozen people, all of whom had good relationships with the area's neighbors. 3 of the apartment complexes nearby offer low-income housing, and the street is rarely trafficked. In the first Message to the Mayor documentary, we spoke with Wolf, an unhoused community member for many years, and a natural leader in every camp he has called home. He was living at 27th and Marion throughout much of the winter. 6 months later, we spoke with him again.
We moved from Arkins to a couple other places, and we wound up at Marion. And we were looking at, it was just a small little fenced lot, and we were trying to get in there. We were in negotiations with the priest or the bishop, the guy who, because his church owned it. And it turned out it didn't work real well, but we were there for quite a long time. And then just one day they came up and put notices on us, and they started making more of an appearance, the police and then the people that say they're there to help you and this and that. But I mean, some of them really are, but when you can sit inside your tent and they don't know you're awake and you can actually hear them cracking jokes about what they're about ready to do, it kind of gives you a bad taste in your mouth about the whole situation. But what happened over there at Marion is there was a couple of really bad cold snaps. And I had a 4-man tent, and I wound up sleeping with my feet against the door. And I wound up getting frostbite pretty bad. The whole bottom of my feet were, bloody and shit, and the top of them were black. And so we took care of that. A couple of the people that, come by and help you and do things, and that really are there for that, they noticed that, and they came in. They knew that I was on the list, so they actually went more active on it. And like a month and a half later, I was in an apartment, healing up rather than being out there and just getting it worse and worse every time. When you've been out on the street for, a number of years, 5, sometimes 10 years, people are out here. That's what they're used to. That's what the norm has become. And I mean, you're gathering candles and anything that will burn all summer and stockpiling it for when winter comes. Because when it gets down below zero and you're in a tent, there ain't a lot you can do. I keep stuff for trade, and then I keep stuff for different times of the year because I can't stash it anywhere, which is what the problem was. The people, they gave me a motel room over at Coalition for the Homeless because it was getting really, really cold, and because of frostbite, they put me in a motel for a few days until the apartment kicked in. Well, we got swept in Marion, so I took my stuff and I took it down to between 31st and 30th and Blake because we camped there quite a bit over the years. And I put it in a nice pile and I covered it over with tarps because the next day I was going in the apartment. Well, that night somebody come and told me that the police had went and scooped all my stuff up and thrown it away. They didn't even put it in storage. They threw it away. So I went from having all this stuff to having just the clothes that I was wearing. I mean, people take 4 walls and a roof for granted. And I never really did, but I especially don't now. My hope and wish is that there aren't anybody freezing. There aren't anybody starving. Nobody with no place to live while other people are eating fat and living high. That ain't even human. It means a lot to me because I worked all my life. I've worked construction all my life. I was in the military, and sometimes I worked 2 jobs. But I've always had a place to go, and I didn't. So yeah, I'm emotional about that.
6 hours after Wolf's 4th displacement in 6 months, the snow began to fall.
The mountains will see the snow over the course of the day, and then really the snow doesn't build into Denver until about 5:30 tonight, continuing overnight into Thursday morning, and that gets us in that 2 to 5 inch range for the city.
In fact, Denver racked up more than 10 inches of snow by Thursday morning, which collapsed countless tents across the city. The sweep scheduled for Thursday morning was canceled, not due to this inclement weather, but because the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure hadn't posted the sweep properly, so any action would have been in violation of the federal injunction. The sweep scheduled the following day, on Friday, with 6 inches of snow still on the ground, went ahead as planned. More than 30 people had been living at 10th and Cherokee, an out-of-the-way camp surrounding a commercial building that was largely unused or abandoned. However, this camp was also at the south end of Denver's Golden Triangle neighborhood, which is quickly filling with luxury condos, as well as a distaste for any reminders that poverty exists in the city. Despite the bitter cold, the sweep began at 6:30 sharp, and city contractors wasted no time in destroying what they assumed to be garbage. However, moments later, the owner of that garbage emerged from the tent, only to find his possessions gone. This casual disrespect for ownership and humanity is common at sweeps, even frequent. City contractors rush residents to move faster, pressuring them with deadlines and vague threats, increasing the stress of an already traumatic event. The discomfort of being trapped in a cage with a dozen police officers and hostile contractors results in many people discarding gear and possessions they would have otherwise kept had they not been forced to move along. Every sweep in 2021 has been justified by citing the camp's significant encumbrance on the right-of-way. Their very existence has been criminalized. Of the residents in this camp, none were offered housing or motel vouchers. However, housed residents nearby took it upon themselves to install anti-homeless architecture across the street before the sweep was even finished. Although a permit is required to alter the public spaces adjacent to one's property, the city officials and police on site did not object to this encumbrance. The Colfax and Washington camp was scheduled to be swept on Thursday, February 25th, but was rescheduled for 2 weeks later. Business owners on both sides of the street threatened unhoused advocates and journalists with arrest and violence for filming the sweep from their parking lots. Before the sweep was even finished, employees were pounding stakes into the grass for fencing to ensure that the unhoused could not return. As they do at each sweep, EHS workers and the Denver Fire Department seized every propane tank they saw, even if those tanks were being packed up by residents, even though the forecast for the days ahead was deadly. A few hours after the sweep was completed, Governor Polis had a warning for the state.
Much better to, if the snow starts coming down hard in your area, stay at home and not go out and not venture far in your vehicle. It's likely to get worse.
So, while canceling the eviction of this camp back in February meant avoiding a move during one blizzard, this rescheduled sweep on March 11th displaced and traumatized more than a dozen people, right before the fourth largest snowstorm in Denver's history.
In fact, National Weather Service has put us under a winter storm warning 5 a.m. Saturday through 6 a.m. on Monday for, 2 to 4 feet in the foothill areas west of I-25 above 6,500 feet, but in Denver, 14 to 24 inches of snow. Now,
But these streets, most of the side streets especially, are still covered, and so are the tents in the homeless camps all around the city. Earlier today, we met 2 women who were trying to keep the people inside them as safe as possible. Kelsang Viria
Yeah, I'm trying to get this up here so it's more of an opening.
decides to help people who feel they don't have a choice.
Oh, it's kind of collapsing on you, isn't it?
She says 2 tents in just this one homeless camp have already collapsed from the snow.
Oh, here we go. We got it. Oh, maybe. I think I got to get some of that snow off the bat. Frostbite is just a way of life for the unhoused, I think, which is very sad. Seriously, is this how we take care of our people? Is this how we take care of our people? Is this how we take care of our people? Is this how we take care of our people? Is this how we take care of our people? Is this how we take care of our people? Is this how we take care of our people? Is this how we take care of our people? Is this how we take care of our people? Seriously, is this how we take care of our people?
Where houses human beings.
Meanwhile, another safe outdoor space, also known as SOS, opened up for the homeless.
A record number of people are seeking assistance for rent in the Denver area.
Large encampments are now scattered across countless American cities. LA, Austin, Chicago, Tacoma, San Jose, Denver, Portland, Las Vegas, Houston, San Diego, and more, in a way we haven't seen since the 1930s. As a contentious issue that has been around for decades, there has been plenty of time for societal stigmas against homelessness to form, for sweeping judgments to be made, and for unfair assumptions to be passed on to new generations.
They're breaking the law by setting up tents, and I wish we didn't have to do sweeps, but if they're going to continue to set them up, we should be doing sweeps, and there should be some consequence for them breaking the law.
As of February 2021, there were an estimated 6,000 unhoused residents between Denver's shelters and unsanctioned encampments. Prior to COVID-19, the city's maximum shelter capacity was only 2,134, and after the pandemic struck, that number plunged more than 50% to only 935 beds. The city temporarily added another 1,000 beds at the National Western Complex and the Denver Coliseum, but that effort didn't even bring the capacity back to pre-COVID totals. As this graph shows, the city's shelter capacity as of March 2021 stood at just over 2,500. Throughout the pandemic, nearly 2,000 people were also temporarily housed in hotels and motels across the city. This means that even if every shelter bed and city-funded motel room is filled, roughly 1,500 folks are left sleeping outside on any given night. Unfortunately, capacity concerns are just the beginning of the problem when it comes to shelters.
And then finally, shelters, which we normally think of as a safe place when it comes to the homeless population, are actually a hotbed for spreading infection and can paradoxically increase risk during this type of pandemic. We were right in the dead of winter. We've had really, really cold temperatures, which is obviously increasing the demand for shelters. And that's making it much more difficult to socially distance, to limit the number of people that are staying in the shelters. So the CDC has actually issued formal guidance that says that encampment sweeps should not be occurring during the pandemic.
People do not want to go into shelter system because they can't take their belongings.
For those who do want to stay in a shelter, getting in isn't always easy.
Well, you had to go to find them. I mean, there's the Mission, there's Samaritan House, there's Coalition for the Homeless. There's all these places, but you got to go in. You got to have a card to get in there. You got to go have a meeting because you got to sit in line all day, and you're not actually getting anything done. I mean, they try the best they can, but with all the people we have out here on the street, it takes a while.
And once you're inside, there are other risks to consider.
What many people don't know is that in order to apply for housing, you do have to have your ID, your birth certificate, and a social security card. And often, as we've discussed in these sweeps, a lot of those belongings are displaced. People lose those items all the time. They're stolen, they're thrown away. If you go into a shelter, a lot of times you can't bring all your gear with you, and so you lose stuff in that process as well.
The experience of staying in a shelter can be dehumanizing and traumatizing, which is why so many choose to stay in tents. Many housed community members understand this and regularly remind City Council that they want real solutions.
As this new year begins, I believe that the Mayor and City Council must work and finally find new solutions to the crisis of homelessness in our city. I have never supported the camping ban, but I didn't support Prop 300 either. The camping ban 8 years out is a failure because its cruel one-size-fits-all approach does not recognize the humanity of this city's unhoused citizens. It ignores the reasons why they resist going into the city shelters, their fears for their health, safety, and theft of their possessions, families being separated, and no places for people to go with their beloved pets.
Shelters can act as a form of carceral housing, like halfway houses, designed for those with criminal backgrounds or substance abuse issues. There are strictly enforced rules and guidelines at Denver's shelter options that can make the experience feel very much like jail, including the dehumanizing conditions.
And then in the shelters, it's more like a facility, like a housing facility, a jail facility, because you got petty stuff, the rules, what I'm saying? It's just like they take away your rights,
The police officers at every sweep tell the evicted residents to just go to a shelter, which also means trusting city contractors with a well-documented history of abuse to store their belongings safely at a storage facility that is only open 16 hours per week. Unfortunately, these supposedly safe havens are anything but. Theft, violence, and sexual assault often go unresolved, as residents are actively discouraged from reporting any incidents to the police.
Come to find out that this guy was not a decent person, at all. He kept on going out of his way to try to get me to go with him to a motel to have sex, and I kept on feeling really leery, like, why does he seemed to be almost anywhere I'm around, and I just kept getting the, getting the creeps and stuff. And one Saturday, I was, wiping the tables, and there's the camera right there. And he reached over and grabbed my breast. And I said, "What the fuck are you doing? Get your hands off of me." And I ran down the stairs, and I told security, I said, I just was sexually assaulted. So the security guard, who was a guy, tells me, "Well, you can't call the police." I said, "What do you mean I can't call the police?" And they go, no. You see, he, so they check the camera, right? And he's checking the camera with me. He sees the whole thing. He said, "Oh, especially not him." And I said, "What? Does it matter? Which guy? Does it matter?" And so security tells me, "Well, he's from Sterling, and the state pays top dollar to Samaritan House to house people that get out of Sterling." He's an ex-con.
I think that if you're even just a little bit removed from it, you have no idea what these people are going through, what they're living through. I mean, because they, like I said, they considered this their home. So this is their home, and I think that house residents just, I don't know, it's kind of that also not in my backyard type of mentality. Like, it's okay and I'll help, but I don't really want it here. I don't want it in front of my kids. I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt, or the drug use. And I mean, certainly there is that aspect of it. I'm not I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There is drug use. There's alcohol, right? There's all of that. There's fights. But for the most part, I think that everyone just wants a chance to live and to feel safe. To feel safe, and whether it's their tent or their home or their car, whatever it is, we all deserve that dignity to have somewhere that we feel safe at night.
One of the most common complaints concerning unhoused populations is the garbage, human waste, and potential health hazards that long-term encampments may contain or bring in to a neighborhood. In 2020, these sanitation issues were used to justify dozens of sweeps of encampments, and these excuses are still employed during sweeps to justify the destruction of entire homes, including all the possessions inside, if a tent is found unoccupied. Everyone has to poop, and everyone generates some amount of trash. However, the vast majority of housed residents have access to a private bathroom and have their garbage regularly collected. The unhoused residents of Denver do not have such luxuries, despite what the city's Department of Public Health and Environment has claimed as recently as April of this year.
These areas are serviced with daily trash pickup throughout the weekdays.
According to advocates on the ground and unhoused camp residents, trash trucks sometimes come by in the days leading up to a sweep for a pre-clean, once the decision to evict the residents has already been made. However, the claim that Denver's encampments are serviced with daily or even weekly trash collection is simply untrue. If they were, the significant amounts of garbage collected at sweeps wouldn't be there to begin with. Neighborhood dumpsters are often locked, leaving the unhoused with few options to keep their spaces clean. Aside from the uncollected trash intentionally neglected by the city in order to justify a forced expulsion, there is also the issue of human waste. According to a June 2021 article in Denverite, there are only 8 public bathrooms listed on the city's website. Of those 8, 2 are closed, 3 require passing through a security checkpoint or metal detector, and 1 is intentionally designed without doors to curb drug use. For the more than 1,000 Denverites on the street each night, there is only a single bathroom they can access between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Denver Homeless Out Loud, a homeless advocacy group that has been pushing back against the city's urban camping ban and the inhumanity of sweeps for more than a decade, has rented porta potties to put in front of their buildings since the beginning of 2021. There are multiple requests to the city for bathroom services in that neighborhood, which is also the hub of unhoused services in the city, have been denied.
That we talk about cleanups here towards the end of the presentation, because it really is a last resort, and it's not the tool that we grab for it to begin.
On the contrary, given that the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure schedules sweeps up to 6 weeks out before any attempts at trash collection or health risk mitigation are made, it seems that sweeps are more like a preemptive strike against the unhoused not a last line of defense. In December of 2020, the mayor's office partnered with Colorado Village Collaborative and Interfaith Alliance to open 2 safe outdoor spaces in Denver's Cap Hill neighborhood.
This model is intended to do 3 things. First, mitigate the spread of COVID-19 amongst our unhoused neighbors. Second, connect those same unhoused neighbors to critical services like housing and ongoing case management support. And third, reduce the impact of unsanctioned camps on our neighborhoods.
While nearby residents of these SOS sites were initially hesitant, both camps were full of success stories.
It's a place to focus on getting on the right path to sobriety or to a job. Some just like knowing there's a place to shower, to use the restroom. But the leases at the 2 sites, one on 16th and Pearl, the other at 14th and Grant, will only go for another 5 months.
You know, while it doesn't eradicate homelessness, it definitely assists in giving people the opportunity to have a bathroom, giving people the opportunity to have a place to sleep that's not people's front yards.
These temporary sanctioned camps were pitched as 6-month service-rich pilot programs, yet despite community support and approval, neither received ongoing funding to stay in their Capitol Hill locations. Two new SOS sites opened in Denver in June of 2021. One on a Regis University parking lot, and another at the Park Hill United Methodist Church. These replacement SOS sites are located far from downtown, as well as the unhoused service providers of the city, including caseworkers, doctors, and specialists. The 2 Capitol Hill SOS sites were about a 1-mile walk from the Stout Street Health Center, but the new Park Hill location is 3.5 miles away from this essential hub, while the Regis University site is located 5 miles northwest. These 2 new sites are also on 6-month leases. Again, Mayor Hancock is choosing a temporary band-aid rather than a permanent fix, but these SOS sites are a much more humane approach than shelters or sweeps.
It's a legalized camping area where the city has allowed us to set up shelters for individuals who are traditionally shelter resistant or service resistant. Not everyone meets the normal shelter requirements or shelter needs. There's a lot of trauma with our community members and our folks being pushed around and being abused on the streets. Once they're in here, they realize that it's a safe place, and most of them are very appreciative.
A survey of 600 Denver residents last year showed that 8 of 10 respondents supported the SOS model as an alternative to unsanctioned encampments. But there remains opposition to such humanitarian solutions, making it difficult to expand the program throughout the city.
It feels like the decision was made rather abruptly. We want to educate ourselves and understand the full picture before we make rash decisions or at least jump to conclusions. But, our gut reaction is we don't know what we're getting into. That comes with the understanding that we're involved in decision making.
The current agreement between Colorado Village Collaborative and the city only allows the nonprofit to operate 2 SOS sites at a time, but efforts are being made to eliminate this severe restriction. Denver has budgeted $900,000 for the 2 new camps, which breaks down to roughly $1,363 per month per resident. As of June 2021, the average rent for a studio apartment in Denver is $1,229.
All 3 of us were homeless, there would have to be a tailored approach to each and every one of us because our cause and what rendered us homeless is different, and we have to approach it differently.
If the mayor understands that every person experiencing homelessness requires a tailored approach and to be treated as an individual, then why does every sweep play out in exactly the same way? A 10-to-1 ratio of police officers to social workers, abusive language and behavior from city contracted cleanup crews, and a perennial lack of long-term housing solutions. Even during February's brutal sweeps, only a handful of those evicted were offered stable housing. Some were given temporary motel vouchers. Most received nothing, or were told to simply go to a shelter.
We know what works to stabilize our residents. We know housing first works. We know for many of those experiencing homelessness, housing plus services works even better.
Housing is the most elegant and efficient investment that we can make. The solutions are housing and services.
Unhoused advocates agree, but talking about housing first is different than enacting policies to deliver on that mantra. The number of new affordable housing units proposed by Denver through 2022 isn't nearly enough to keep up with this mounting crisis, particularly with the end of the federal eviction moratorium on June 30th of this year.
We right now have about 1,600 units of affordable housing under construction here in the city of Denver at 22 sites. We recently made funding priorities and commitments to 250 units of supportive housing here in the city of Denver.
Denver has responded to its growing housing crisis with fatally insufficient support services and a militarized, dehumanizing strategy of weekly sweeps. During last year's summer and autumn of protests, activists regularly showed up at early morning sweeps to protest police brutality. However, as the seasons changed, so did the strategies of community members on the ground. Since the summer of 2020, Kelsang Virya has attended nearly every sweep to support the unhoused on their hardest mornings. What started with a small coffee pot and a Tupperware full of sugar has grown to a bountiful mutual aid table outside every displacement, complete with hot homemade breakfast, coffee and hot chocolate, pastries, hygiene products, clothes, and dozens of advocates to help folks move their belongings.
So we started like end of October, I think, but this really took off. So we just come down here with food and gear and get to know our unhoused neighbors. And yeah, you know, it's like emergency situation in the winter as far as keeping people alive from the, the cold and the snow and everything.
The cyclical, futile nature of the sweeps is clear. The city's answer in every season has been violent displacement. But what we actually need is creativity and a radically humanistic approach.
We have some projects in the making for like a swamp cooler thing for a tent. And we have this really cool idea of a cooler, and it's a terracotta pot, a bigger one and the smaller one, and you put sand in there, and then you can keep food in there for 20 days. Cool. Yeah, we're trying out something. It's, lugaloos, and they're basically just 5-gallon buckets or 3-gallon buckets, and you can get a toilet seat, or you can just make it with a swim noodle. You can make a nice seat. And it's just a way for them to have a little dignity. And also trying some privacy pop-up tents. And also we're starting a laundry service, because that's part of the trash is the clothes that are that get dirty, and they want to wash their clothes, but they can't afford to. And how can they get to the laundromat? So we're starting out by going and picking up their laundry, washing it, and bringing it back. Everything the city doesn't do, we're trying to, we shouldn't have to. The city should be providing them showers and, toilets and laundry service, and at the minimum, we should not have to be doing this. But since they're not, I'm not, somebody has to.
When it comes to supporting the welfare of unhoused residents in Denver, the city has become an encumbrance to aid and stability. From the fencing they use to cage every camp before a sweep, to the exhausting nightmare of being stuck on a housing list for years. Dozens of mutual aid organizations have formed in the past year to compensate for the city's deadly negligence. By providing compassionate service and support, no questions asked, no strings attached, these mutual aid groups stand with marginalized communities in Denver to offer solidarity, not charity. The distinction between these two philosophies of support is critical.
Well, and I think that's what's so kind of important about these different groups forming. It's people who have constantly watches churches and nonprofits and all these systems that just uphold our current system, and they don't fix it. Whereas I feel like mutual aid is actually trying to dive in and work on policies and work with people and not keep upholding systems that are obviously failing.
Like many of Denver's mutual aid groups that formed in 2020, Women for the Revolution evolved out of necessity. Vulnerable and historically excluded populations were hit hardest by the pandemic, and community members stepped up.
We originally started Women for the Revolution more on like the abolition, anti-capitalist principle, and so we were kind of figuring out like how we wanted to navigate this. We obviously want to work with women, uplift women's voices, especially like within the BIPOC community. So we started doing fundraisers like for the unhoused, but we would give our stuff to other mutual aid groups, and we're like, hey, why don't we just do this ourselves? So we started doing gear drives, and then we just kind of collected it, and then we joined forces with Viria Kelsang, and when like all of their work with Monday Night Mutual Aid, and then just really stepped up from there. We make a lot of care kits just to have in our cars, so then we'll directly just go to encampments. One of the main things is just like with people in the cold, like the constant sweeps, people are losing their gear. They come to like Monday night, they get gear. There's another sweep, they lose their gear, and then they come back. So it's just perpetual cycle of just literally watching people just try to stay alive when they're getting these resources, but like when you're constantly just like getting them take away, it's just this constant backtrack and just constant suffering.
Witnessing this type of constant suffering firsthand has been a catalyst for some of the most impactful mutual aid groups in Denver.
So Olive and I started working together after meeting at the sweeps. She and I would make breakfast burritos in the morning and take them down to the sweep so that people had something to eat when they're being forcibly displaced from their homes. And it just sort of snowballed from there as people heard about what we were doing. More and more people said, hey, I have this extra food that's going to waste. And in November, we kind of made things official, had a really big dinner on Thanksgiving. We fed like 400 and something people. And that was kind of like the kickoff of the whole thing. But yeah, food waste mitigation has been like really integral from the start, and also just addressing all these different intersections that we have here as far as like racism and homelessness existing together, the food desert that is like most of North Denver. We want to address all that.
Providing relief comes in many different forms, but generally focuses on the basic human needs not being met: food, water, warmth, rest, security, and safety. This past February and March, when Denver was slammed by historic blizzards and sub-zero temperatures, organizations like Comrade Co-op partnered with other mutual aid groups and individuals to keep the city's unhoused populations alive.
There was a man who we had a pretty good relationship with because he was over at 16th and Lafayette, which was a camp that we went to pretty regularly and managed to stay up for a long time, which is why we had like bonds with a lot of those people. And he had pretty bad frostbite, and we tried to get him medical attention, and he was not treated well at the hospital at all. He ended up being released probably too early. We were able to get him a hotel room, which was great, but just seeing the like complete lack of compassion, both at the hospital and that camp ended up getting swept really soon afterward, and he's trying to heal from having these amputations that he had to get and deal with moving all of his stuff in time. And that was like a big intersection of like, wow, this whole thing is messed up. Like, you can't even get proper medical care without being treated as like less than.
But I think what was the coolest thing in all of that is how much our community came together to fund hotel rooms. So we were able to get a ton of people up into hotel rooms, and so many, in fact, that we were able to give some of our funds over to Boulder, to the Safe in Boulder, to go ahead and also get some hotel rooms there. So I think my favorite part of that and all the horror and the trauma was how many like hotel rooms we were able to get and how many people we were able to put up.
Along with dozens of hotel rooms secured for those freezing on the streets, hundreds of coats, hats, scarves, and blankets were donated and distributed, as well as thousands of hand warmers, homemade street heaters, and hot meals. This life-saving support did not come from city departments or paid employees, but rather from community volunteers, often raising money from their own small but mighty mutual aid networks for survival gear and food. For the record, there were plenty of empty hotel rooms and apartments throughout the city, but getting into one is not always an easy task.
They put so many restrictions on who can go in those hotels and why, and then would leave a number of rooms empty. And I just thought it was, just really frustrating as, people going out delivering all this food that's basically food waste. to people who have nothing to eat, and then there's plenty of places for them to stay. And even though the city has an approach to, to house this, or an approach to house some of those people if they meet certain conditions, they were still spending per diem on those rooms as if they were occupied.
In March of 2021, 2 weeks after the city's record-breaking blizzard, a court-mandated homeless advisory meeting was held in Denver's Civic Center Park. This quarterly meeting is intended for city departments to communicate and collaborate with on-the-ground advocacy groups and hear directly from the unhoused community of Denver. Evan Dreyer, a 10-year veteran of the mayor's office who currently serves as his deputy chief of staff and personally oversees every encampment sweep, was present for the meeting. He declined to speak or answer a single question posed to him. He left immediately after the meeting concluded, refusing to speak with any of the advocates present. When this is what the mayor's office means by good faith collaboration with the community, it comes as no surprise that advocates on the ground have taken matters into their own hands. The mutual aid revolution in Denver was driven by the city's failure to provide for its most vulnerable, and has been sustained by overlapping communities of activists who realize that a better way is not only possible, but already exists.
To me, mutual aid is abolitionist, at its core. It should be. At the end of the day, we are working towards a system where we aren't dealing with police, we aren't relying on these very insufficient state-run kind of programs and things. So practicing on the small level of feeding people, those sorts of things, is just a step towards that vision of community care where we don't need police, we don't need the city government, they're failing us anyway. Showing the community and showing the city that we can take care of each other and we don't need them and they're doing enough harm and we can just take care of our own.
Beyond satisfying the basic survival needs of those who need support, this type of direct engagement has longer and more cumulative benefits as well.
So it's extremely empowering for them to just be asked that, and for us to be able to not only provide food and such, but direct them to other resources, because a lot of times, people we usually talk to on the regular will start to trust us and then be able to come up to us and be like, hey, how do I find a harm reduction center? How do I find help with that? And that is so important, because in that community building, you're also empowering your community and creating a very strong cohesion around collective care that's sufficient and self-sustaining as well.
But the new world is possible, and if we can establish connection and show people within the community that members of their community care about them, and raise awareness around some of these issues. Around the issue of abolitionism, about the money that's going towards parts of government that are they're working hand in hand to systematically oppress a number of people in a country that calls itself a free country. And I think if we can raise awareness enough and among the community and show solidarity with folks, I do think a new world is possible.
This work takes many forms, whether it is donating food or clothing to mutual aid drives, speaking at city council public comment, destigmatizing your mindset, or simply talking to your neighbors in need.
So until about 3 weeks ago, there was a camp here and then a camp. There were two camps, basically, one here and another one right at the end of my block. And mostly the camp, I just said hi to folks most days, just on my way through the neighborhood. And then a neighbor of mine noticed the signs the city's now putting up to give warning in the sweeps. And she texted me a picture of the sign and said, uh-oh. And I said, let me reach out to some folks and see what we can do. And so I am friends with the folks who do the Community Fridge Project. I know the Community Fridge Project is deeply involved with the other mutual aid groups, so I knew they would have ideas about what we could do in response. There had been a sweep several months ago near the Fox News station. So I had known that camp and said hello to those folks, and then went out one day and they were just gone. I guess I hadn't seen the notices. And I had felt this sort of, like a grief at that camp being gone. And so having the opportunity to actually respond to the fact that a sweep was happening felt really important. Thing Eli at the Community Fridge Project said to me was, well, have you talked to the folks at the camp about what they need? And I was like, oh yeah, I could just talk to my neighbors about what they need. This is what I would do about almost any other neighborhood problem.
you know, like if I knew somebody was having trouble, I would just say, what can we do? We've just been more active with the community fridge. We love that community fridge. My daughters are attached to the community fridge. We've already had a relationship to our fridge. We follow it on Instagram now, but it feels even more important. I don't bring my phone out a lot in the neighborhood, and so I didn't bring my phone to the sweep, and the phones end up being incredibly important for creating connections, but also for filming the sweep. When people pull out their phones to film the sweep, it actually affects what people do on the part of the city, which I had no idea, right? Like, you know, the pandemic and really the community fridge project, I think was maybe the thing that made me feel like maybe just showing up and doing what I could. Like I didn't need to go to my council person, or I didn't need to be part of an organization, but like just showing up and talking and trying to figure things out in that mutual aid way could itself be transformative.
Continuing to believe in and fight for a new world is what mutual aid is all about. Changing the direction of a city or a nation requires a shift in thinking from all of us.
So I feel like in some ways every day my understanding of these problems is evolving, because as you build relationships you just hear more about how people's lives are affected by them, but you also see the solutions and the ways that people build together these transformative solutions, like putting a fridge on the street that people can just access, right? That people who want to give something can access, and that people who need something can access. So I think we're in the transformation. I think it comes down to us. And I don't know that I would have said that a year and a half ago, even though I've advocated prison abolition for a very long time. I don't think I appreciated that it's us and it's how we live our lives that can build this different future.
If we all just did a little bit, if we all did a little tiny bit, we could solve this. If we all had more compassion in our heart, we could solve this. If we were all kinder to each other, if we were all more connected, if we all cared more. I think it's just really going to be collective rising of humanity, of all of us.
We asked each of those being interviewed if they had a personal comment for the mayor, a final message to Michael Hancock himself. This is what they had to say.
Find your humanity and just care about your community that you said that you would represent.
Fix it. Take the money you're using for sweeps, take the money you're using to pay the officers to harass people, and they do, and use that to help the situation instead of hurting the situation.
Hey, who are you serving when you are neglecting such a large portion of your community? And I think I'd also ask him, like, how is this building like a sustainable city?
Resign.
Yeah.
That's all I want to see.
Well, I'd like the mayor and his cohorts to step aside and let us do this. Let the community take over then, and the city should be paying for it, and the trash pickup, the laundry service, everything, the showers. But they seem to be the blocking point for us, you know? And so we just need to take it over. Step aside, let us do it. Yeah, I know.
Stop the sweeps. Stop the fucking sweeps. Stop killing the people in your city. You know, like, there's a lot more to say, but if I get one thing to say to the mayor, stop the sweeps.
You got the quad, you got the triple it. Starving, stomach touching, no lunching, broke, no hope, pocket lint clutching. Can't eat, can't sleep, can't function. Cop pushing me in the street, bum rushing. Pull something out of the trash can and ate it. Pretend, imagining my mom just made it. Breath smelling like boat smoke with no soap. Sprinkler soak, holes that my toenails poke. In my sock from walking the block with no shoes. If I die, I won't even make it on the news. Bump chill, giving the spiel and narration. Hancock it's on your watch. Legislation, talk about my tax dollars, put it in contents. Buy land, build a complex, it's not that complex. I'm not impressed cause we're failing the test. Folks claiming that they're blessed, but you're looking a mess. I'm in raw, keep a watchful eye in my eye. What you do when the dark comes out on the block. Kids with no place to go, they just roaming. Pushed out from gentrification and zoning. Honing on the issues, get it fixed. So we can praise you on the next one, remix. If Colorado's the best place to live, change it. Homeless can't even get warm meals or blankets.
Cut the streets, need you. You promised to do something, but we don't believe you. Man, cut the city and need you. Promised to do something, but we don't see you. Man, cut the streets, need you. You promised to do something, but we don't believe you. Man, cut the streets, need you. You promised to do something.